was called here today as a witness, but I showed up because I am a doctor. Because how many years ago I swore an oath to do no harm. After witnessing firsthand the carnage in my hometown of Uvalde, to stay silent would have betrayed that oath. Inaction is harm. Passivity is harm. Delay is harm. So here I am, not to plead, not to beg or convince you of anything, but to do my job, and hope that by doing so, it inspires the members of this House to do theirs. It was right around lunchtime on a Tuesday that gunman entered the school through a main door without restriction, massacred 19 students and 2 teachers, and changed the way that every student at Robb and their families will remember that school forever. I know I will never forget what I saw that day. A colleague from the San Antonio Trauma Center texted me and said, "Why are pediatric surgeons and anesthesiologists on call for a mass shooting in Uvalde?" I raced to the hospital to find parents outside yelling children's names in desperation and sobbing as they begged for any news related to their child. Those mothers' cries I will never get out of my head. As I entered the chaos of the ER, the first casualty I came across was Mia Cerrillo. She was sitting in the hallway. Her face was still clearly in shock, but her whole body was shaking from the adrenaline coursing through it. The white Lilo and Stitch shirt that she wore was covered in blood, and her shoulder was bleeding from a shrapnel injury. When I saw Mia sitting there, I remembered having seen her parents outside. So after quickly examining 2 other patients of mine in the hallway with minor injuries, I raced outside to let them know that Mia was alive. I wasn't ready for their next urgent and desperate question. "Where's Elena?" Elena is Mia's 8-year-old sister, who was also at Robb at the time of the shooting. I had heard from some of the nurses that there were 2 dead children who had been moved to the surgical area of the hospital. As I made my way there, I prayed that I wouldn't find her. I didn't find Elena. But what I did find was something no prayer will ever relieve. 2 children whose bodies had been pulverized by bullets fired at them, decapitated, whose flesh had been ripped apart, that the only clue as their identities was a blood-splattered cartoon clothes still clinging to them, clinging for life and finding none. I could only hope these 2 bodies were a tragic exception to the list of survivors. But as I waited there with my fellow Uvalde doctors, nurses, first responders, and hospital staff for other casualties we hope to save, they never arrived. All that remained was the bodies of 17 more children and the 2 teachers who cared for them, who dedicated their careers to nurturing and respecting the awesome potential of every single one, just as we doctors do. Innocent children all over the country today are dead because laws and policy allows people to buy weapons before they're legally old enough to even buy a pack of beer. They're dead because restrictions have been allowed to lapse. They're dead because there are no rules about where guns are kept, because no one is paying attention to who is buying them. The thing I can't figure out is whether our politicians are failing us out of stubbornness, passivity, or both. I chose to be a pediatrician. I chose to take care of children. But making sure our children are safe from guns, that's the job of our politicians and leaders. My oath as a doctor means that I signed up to save lives. I do my job. And I guess it turns out that I am here to plead, to beg, to please, please do yours.
What are we doing? Just days after a shooter walked into a grocery store to gun down African-American patrons, we have another Sandy Hook on our hands. What are we doing? There have been more mass shootings than days in the year. Our kids are living in fear every single time they set foot in a classroom because they think they're going to be next. What are we doing? Why do you spend all this time running for the United States Senate? Why do you go through all the hassle of getting this job, of putting yourself in a position of authority, if your answer is that as this slaughter increases, as our kids run for their lives, we do nothing? What are we doing? Why are you here? If not to solve a problem as existential as this. This isn't inevitable. These kids weren't unlucky. This only happens in this country and nowhere else. Nowhere else do little kids go to school thinking that they might be shot that day. Nowhere else do parents have to talk to their kids, as I have had to do, about why they got locked into a bathroom and told to be quiet for 5 minutes just in case a bad man entered that building. Nowhere else does that happen except here in the United States of America, and it is a choice. It is our choice to let it continue. What are we doing?
My son, Zaire, has a hole in the right side of his neck, 2 on his back, and another on his left leg, caused by an exploding bullet from an AR-15. As I clean his wounds, I can feel pieces of that bullet in his back. Shrapnel will be left inside of his body for the rest of his life. As an elected official, it is your duty to draft legislation that protects Zaire and all of the children and citizens in this country. If, after hearing from me and the other people testifying here today, does not move you to act on gun laws, I invite you to my home to help me clean Zaire's wounds so that you may see up close the damage that has been caused to my son.
It was wrenching testimony today from another mom whose reality is now what she describes there, tending to Zaire's wounds. That's her son, Zaire Goodman. He survived a mass shooting last month in Buffalo, New York. Let's bring into our coverage David Hogg. He, of course, is the survivor of the 2018 Parkland school shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. He's also the co-founder of March for Our Lives. Shannon Watts and David Jelly are also still with us. David, let me ask you first how you're doing. I mean, what is it like to see this happen in another school for you?
It's horrific. As a survivor, it's incredibly hard seeing this happen every day, inside and outside of our schools. You know, I not only think about when these things are on TV, but I think about friends of mine like Ruhan Brown, who goes to Harvard with me, but grew up in Southeast D.C. And has lost over a dozen friends and family to gun violence, and they don't get on the news. I think about the people that are out there every day experiencing this trauma over and over again, that again, do not get on the news because this violence is so prevalent in this country.
You know, from your perch, how do we change the conversation to capture the pace and the frequency and the damage being done at this hour, at this moment in our country?
Yeah, I think the way that March for Our Lives, the organization that my friends and I founded in the wake of Parkland that's focused on stopping shootings, not just inside of our schools, but outside of them as well, by working with communities, is focused on changing the conversation from being you're either anti-gun or you're pro-gun to being, you know, all of us are pro-peace. All of us are pro-gun safety. And that's what we're focused on, how we change the conversation, is by highlighting especially the young lives that are taken every day by this senseless violence, and the lives that not only make it on the news, but the ones that don't. Because it doesn't matter what zip code you're in or what the color of your skin is, you know, black and brown kids and white kids, they all smile the same when they open their presents on their birthday or on Christmas, you know, and we need to realize as Americans that this is not a political issue, this is a moral issue. We must figure out what the common ground is to address how somebody gets a gun and why they want to pick it up, to address the fact that mental health does have a role to play and that 2/3 of gun deaths are suicides, but we should not treat hatred as a mental illness. Racism is not a mental illness. We have to address these systemic injustices and the hatred that is driving gun violence at its root, and also address how an 18 or 19-year-old, like the shooter at my high school, is able to legally obtain an AR-15, because the reality is these aren't criminal masterminds. These are barely adults that have hatred in their hearts and go out and use it. We need to address these things not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans working to protect our kids.
Let's start right here. There is nothing like playing the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival.
Are you ready?
Nothing in the world.
Welcome to 50 years of Jazz Fest, everybody.
All the best musicians from around the world.
7,000 musicians on 14 stages over 8 days.
Music and sounds and flavors.
The air is thick, not with just humidity. It's thick with culture.
The world's greatest, backyard barbecue.
You can go see 93-year-old Dookie Chase, famous Gumbo's ear in your face.
This is the real stuff.
You could have been here, you could have been here.
There is no such thing as separation of culture in New Orleans. It's all blended together.
It's no wonder that jazz was born in this area because the people are so enthusiastic.
New Orleans is nothing without its artists. It's just sinking ground, literally.
After Katrina, we almost lost not only our city, but a way of life.
So how do you begin to rebuild from below zero?
No matter who comes, we have to put on Jazz Festival.
The resurrection of spirit and will to live with great expression.
All the New Orleans party people, now scream!
One of the most beautiful concert experiences I've ever had.
The music was cleansing the city and just showing everything's gonna be all right.
That's why I came here. There's a soul in this city.
Life's to be enjoyed, not endured, and there's a lot of that.
Who came to party?
This can only happen in New Orleans.
That's the magic of the festival.
Happy 50th Jazz Fest!
We're gonna go out there and jam. We'll see y'all out there tonight.
Thank you for having me. Well, first of all, I want to address Mr. Graham. It sounded like you was talking about more of the companies and the business in your speech, but you forgot that the people are the ones who make these companies operate. The process for when we hold these companies accountable is not working for us. That's the reason why we're here today. It's not a left or right thing. It's not a Democrat or a Republican thing. It's a workers thing. It's a workers issue. And we're the ones that are suffering. And you should listen because we do represent your constituents as well. The people are the ones that make these corporations go. It's not the other way around. Current interim president of the Amazon Labor Union, who represent 8,300 workers in Staten Island, an independent worker-led union that won their election on April 1st. I'm gonna tell you this, we organized for over a year. And throughout the course of that year, Amazon spent millions of dollars, as you mentioned, Senator Sanders. Myself, including a few other organizers, was arrested outside for organizing, arrested for delivering food to their coworkers. You know, thousands of workers across this country who are in the process of organizing, who have the desire to organize in the United States. We want to feel that we have protections. We want to feel that the government is allowing us to use our constitutional rights to organize. There's clearly defined legal process to do this, and workers like us have the rights protected by the First Amendment and the National Labor Relations Act. And even though we may have won, we did everything right, pressuring Amazon to recognize our victory and comply with our legal obligation to meet us at the bargaining table. But Amazon is refusing to do so. As you mentioned, they're going to stall. They filed 25 objections, and they got the NLRB to move the hearing to a whole nother location. To me, it just sounds like the corporations have the control, and they control whatever they want. They break the law, they get away with it. For example, we filed over 40 ULPs in 11 months. Most of them quite a few of them got merit for further action. Some of them even got injunctions. For example, Gerald Bryson was fired 2 years ago. Finally, 2 years later, over 2 years later, there's a 10J in motion for his reinstatement. Another prime example, Daquan Smith was fired by the company for organizing. He's still out of a job He's living in a shelter right now. We raise money through GoFundMe. These are just a few examples, including myself, who's been out of a job for the last 2 years. I want to just end off by saying this. We need to pass the PRO Act so that workers are protected and workers are encouraged to organize. And if that don't work, I'm gonna let you know right now that on behalf of the Amazon Labor Union and the hundreds of thousands of workers across this country, that we will continue to organize. And once again, I want to remind you that this is not a left or right thing. This is a working class issue. And the workers at the bottom are the ones who make these corporations go. Thank you.
So I came to Born to Run 2019, and I had never seen a person that was disabled on a trail running. We needed to figure out a way to incorporate adaptive athlete like a division.
Sean was born about 2 months premature.
I had a stroke back in 2017.
I have a progressive illness called polycystic kidney disease.
Adaptation is what adventure is all about. And an adventure is an open-ended journey where you don't know where you're going to go. Guess what? Life's like that. Not being able to adapt is not being able to live.
It's a nice little hill. I love it.
The experience I want Born to Adapt athletes to have is an experience where they feel invited, where they feel supported, where they feel seen, where they get to experience the outdoors in a way that's transformational like it is for everybody else.
कूड़ा पीती मेरा नाम बिंदिया
For a little girl like Bindia trying to collect scrap from garbage heaps, love, care, nurturing, these are all impossible. There's really no hope.
मुझे पिट्ठू खेलना पसंद है मेरा नाम भावना है बड़ों के डॉक्टर
Bhavana is 7 years old. She has a secure home. She has a place to study. She has parents who want to make sure that she reaches her fullest potential. A girl like Bhavana will work hard and one day her dreams might come true. Slums form about 1/3 of the city's population. There's a lot of exploitation, there's a lot of oppression, there's a lot of corruption. People have no hope. They will say that God has forgotten us because if He did remember us, then we wouldn't be living like animals. In 1988, there was a cholera epidemic in the city. Hundreds and hundreds of children began to die.
डॉक्टर किरण यहाँ पर जैसे ही उन्होंने शुरुआत करी तो बच्चों से बड़ा प्यार करती थी.
This is where I started Asha, under this very tree. And I used to sit here and I used to see hundreds of patients just out in the open. In those days there was slush and mud everywhere, flies, mosquitoes, pigs.
तो बीमारी इतनी बढ़िया तरीके से दवाई उन्होंने दी. अब डॉक्टर किरण जिस बच्चे को दवाई देती थी वो बच्चा ठीक हो जाता था. हमारा प्यार.
पहले हम उन पर विश्वास नहीं करते थे, लेकिन लोगों ने जब देखा कि ये बहुत ज़्यादा हमारे को सहायता करना चाहती हैं तो फिर धीरे धीरे विश्वास आया.
This kind of radical change requires sustained effort. Unless I was willing to stick it through, there would be no real hope for the people. To me, the word hope is a very real word. It's a word that has come alive in Asha. Yes, I know that we have a long, long way to go. There's a lot more to be done. But the hope and the desire is that many millions of urban poor in India and around the world receive hope. They don't have to live in abject poverty, and there are wonderful ways in which they can actually come out of it.
زه یو تن عبدالرحمن هغه چې د 21مه ناحیه ده او د کاري باندې مشهوره د کاریز باندې کې موږ راغلي وو پوه شوې چې په دې ساحه کې هېڅ شی هم نه اوسېدل ډېر مخکې نه مشکلات خو ډېر ورسېد د اوبو مشکلات وو پوه شوې د سړک مشکلات وو پوه شوې ډېر مشکلاتونه وو.
My name is Arif Khan, Country Program Manager with ORCD. We started a partnership with Penny Appeal in 2018. Little kids and children, instead of DB in school, they were going to provide and pitch water for their families. Most of the people, they are very vulnerable because they return from exile. They would say most of their money and their resources will go to a doctor just to treat their children because of the contaminated water they used to use.
اوس دا مؤسسات چې کوم راغلي دي پوه شوې او دا ټانکۍ د اوبو سهولت یې راته برابر کړی دی پوه شوې موږ د دې نه ډېر راضي او ډېر خوشحاله یو سره اوس خو مو الحمدلله موږ دپاره ډېر سهولت برابر شوی دی ساعت یو نیم ساعت مزل مو پوه شوې په 5 دقیقو باندې بدل شوی دی پوه شوې په ډېر نږدې ساحه کې زموږ کار راته برابر شوی دی پوه شوې ډېر خوشحاله یو پوه شوې.
Our post-monitoring assessment shows the level of the waterborne disease have been reduced to a good degree. .74% of the people, they are living below poverty line. We need many projects, and we appeal to Penny Appeal to expand its intervention in Afghanistan.
It's been called a social experiment. Post-apocalyptic training. Some call it home. A temporary city emerges in the desert. Once, each year. No status, no government, no currency. A society focused on the individual. 1 week of celebrating humanity, expression, and collaboration. One by one, they arrive into dust storms and scorching heat. The city has been constructed and dismantled by its attendees over 30 times. By the end, art and buildings will be burnt to ashes. No trace will be left until next year, where it will be rebuilt again. A community eager to reconnect, to explore, to build what their imaginations can conceive. And share what makes them unique. This experiment isn't about discovering a supreme being. It's about discovering what's supreme in ourselves. A recalibration of the spirit. A reminder to step outside our bubbles, put down our screens, and rediscover ourselves above the noise. To surrender, let go, and co-create a world together. This city is a labor of love. Thousands of people working together to build a world that's meaningful. One that creates unity. A reminder that we are all interconnected. We begin to realize this isn't about you or me. It's about us and what we create together. And when we work together in a tribe, combining our energies, something becomes awakened in us. the ego begins to fade. The self becomes dedicated to something beyond you, that's greater than you. No inhibitions, no judgment, no boundaries. A pilgrimage to disconnect, to look inward, and to explore the self.
The shelling on fields started a week after the war began. I started wearing a bulletproof vest and a helmet for safety. We go out, pass the checkpoints, get to work, drink tea and coffee, put on our vests and go. We fill up the gas tank and then go to the fields. If there is shelling, we pack up and go to the office.
Of course it was scary. The shelling hit my neighbours and destroyed all the fences. It's hard to put into words. There were grad rockets coming in. We got those farmers out with trucks. Thank God we weren't on the fields then. The shelling happens at night usually. Then people come in and check the fields, and specialists are called in. If it's safe, trucks take the rockets out. If not, then they choose the measures on site. This is how we fight the war.
Так і воюємо ми.